The Planning and Zoning meeting for October 2nd, 2019 will now come to order. Please stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, now that we've had roll call, if you'd like to swear in Mr. Bobbitt.
City Council appointed Mr. Bobbitt to the commission at their last council meeting, and I would like to swear him in at this time. Mr. Bobbitt, if you please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand, and if you'd repeat after me. I, Brian Bobbitt,
I, Brian Bobbitt,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
to support,
to support,
protect,
protect,
and defend
and defend
the Constitution and government
the Constitution and government
of the United States
of the United States
and the state of Florida
and the state of Florida,
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
domestic and foreign,
domestic and foreign,
that I will bear
that I will bear
true faith,
true faith,
loyalty,
loyalty,
and allegiance
and allegiance
to the same,
to the same,
that I am entitled to hold office
that I am entitled to hold office
under the Constitution,
under the Constitution,
that I will faithfully
that I will faithfully
perform all duties
perform all duties
of a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission
of a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission
of the City of Titusville,
of the City of Titusville,
on which I am about to enter.
of which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, next is roll call.
Chairman Williams,
Here.
Vice Chairman Severs,
Here.
Secretary Chambers, Member Spidell, Member Bobbitt,
Here.
Member Richardson,
Here.
Member Hare, Member Noel Copeland.
And we have quorum. Next is approval of minutes from September 17th, 2019. Are there any corrections or is there a motion for approval?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right. We'll do this. All persons who anticipate speaking on any of the public hearing items must first fill out the oath card to be heard on that agenda item and sign the oath card contained thereon. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to procedures adopted in Resolution 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on an item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side for or against may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents you desire the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained from the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. And, all right. With that, we will go to, we'll just make sure, has anybody spoken to anybody in the public about the item coming before us? No?
Only as I previously disclosed.
Okay. And with that, if you'd go to the only agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, the ordinance, your only agenda item begins on page 12 of your packet. And this is an ordinance relating to the retention in the area of critical concern. On May 28th of this year, the City Council approved advisability for staff to review and clarify policy language in the land regulations, specifically Section 30-207, Area of Critical Concern Performance. The city requested Barnes, Ferland, and Associates to provide a desktop analysis and professional opinion regarding the proposed amendment. The conclusion of the report, which is attached to your agenda, in Section 6, conclusions state, in part, that BFA concurs with the proposed amendments to the Area of Critical Concern, Section 30-207, paragraphs 2C, retention and discharge requirements. The City Council has made Mr. Patrick Barnes available to present his report and findings regarding the ordinance amending the retention requirements in the Area of Critical Concern for sites with elevations that are 25 mean sea level post-development. Mr. Barnes is a licensed professional geologist with over 34 years of experience practicing hydrogeology. He began his career in 1985 working for Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory as a research assistant in seismology, rock mechanics, and borehole geophysics. In 1988, he joined a New York-based civil engineer firm where he was involved in the field groundwater contamination assessment and remediation for several Superfund sites in the New York area, including the Love Canal Emergency Declaration Area. In 1988, he moved to Florida and joined a civil engineering firm. Here, he's Dyer, Riddle Mills, and Brecourt. He served as a field hydrogeologist and then as the hydrogeology department head, managing wellfield evaluation, design, permitting, construction for several Central Florida cities, including Titusville. In 1994, he formed Barnes, Ferland, and Associates and continued performing hydrogeological and water resource engineering for several municipalities, including ours. He also managed contracts for 4 out of the 5 state of Florida water management districts. Mr. Barnes has worked on the city's water resources for over 31 years, including approval and renewal of our consumptive use permits, for designing and implementing the water future study and engineering feasibility that led to the Area 4 well field. He has also worked very closely with city staff in the development of overall management plans, the design and construction management of several production wells, developing recharge enhancement feasibility projects, and monitoring for potential impacts. Mr. Barnes was successful in helping us obtain an agreement with the Miami Corporation to work with the city to jointly develop a water supply in the Northwest Brevard County area. His capacity as water resources consultant to the city of Titusville has become very familiar with the city's area of critical concern. He is here to address the portion of the report that is relevant to the ordinance, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Barnes. Thank you.
Okay, before you do that, the city attorney wanted to say something.
Right, staff alluded to it, but I just want to make sure there wasn't confusion because as council mentioned at the last council meeting when they made Mr. Barnes available, the report attached has a title of Brookshire on it, but they made it clear Brookshire is not on the agenda. It's not a Brookshire analysis, but a portion of that report did address this proposed amendment change. And as Mr. Parrish just alluded to, that's the portion that we're going to be addressing tonight. And I was asked by one of the new members when he came in, is Brookshire on the agenda because Brookshire was on the report? I also want to clarify, Brookshire is not on your agenda. It's the code change that's on your agenda and that portion of the report that addressed the code change. So I just want to clarify that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I guess let me start by thanking the city for the years of service that you guys have afforded me. It's been great. It really has. Dwight and I go back to the beginning, pretty much. Beginning for me. He was here before, obviously. So I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about your well fields, your superficial aquifer well fields here, and just so that you guys get a sense for how unique it is that we have these superficial aquifer well fields. So most municipalities along the coast originally had superficial aquifer well fields when they formed. These well fields are typically much more tenuous, and as these municipalities grew, they outstripped those sources. They usually salted up, they pump less flow, and these municipalities typically move west or have to adopt alternate treatment technology in order to continue to use wells local to their municipality. In the case of the city of Titusville, it was recognized fairly early just how unique the resource was, and several efforts were made to maximize those resources and to maintain those and to keep them replenished and so on. So the city of Titusville has 2 discrete freshwater lenses that occur, the Area 2 and Area 3 well field. Area 2 is linked to the MIMS well field as well, so it's sort of one bubble, if you will, and it's all recharged locally. And this is different from other well fields in that typically groundwater flows through So in addition to some local recharge due to rain, you get some recharge from flow that comes into the system from outside. What sole source means is that what we pump out, we get locally, okay? And that is the case for both the Area 2 and the Area 3 well field. Of course, like I said, going up to MIMS in the case of Area 2. So that's the hydrogeology background for what we have. These are superficial aquifer wells. They're typically on the order of no more than 130, 140 foot deep. And for example, if you go inland into the Orlando area, you have what are called Florida aquifer wells, which are much deeper, typically over 1,000 foot deep. So this is a unique scenario. The superficial aquifer usually has better water quality in terms of less hardness and so on, mineralization, but it's due to recent recharge. It's rainfall that has fallen within the recent past that you guys end up pumping out, whereas in other areas, that water could have been down there thousands of years in some cases that they're pumping out. So it's a different kind of system, okay? So having said that, when I started working for the city in '88, it was under the backdrop of a recent study that was completed on behalf of the city called a freshwater management study. Freshwater management study was done by Dyer, Riddle, Mills, and Precourt, which is where I went to work. So we, the city and Dyer, Riddle, was in the process of implementing a lot of the recommendations that came out of that study. How to better manage the well field, develop operating plans, block some of the ditches and develop an ordinance that would help maintain these well fields. It was out of that freshwater management study that the area of critical concern concept came about and ultimately resulted in the ordinance that we have today. Is that a reasonable summary, Dwight? Okay. Well, Dwight was heavily involved in that back then as well. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the recharge of the aquifer specifically, because we were brought in to look at the ordinance, proposed ordinance change, which was done. Well, the question that was put to us for our desktop evaluation was if a pre-development land elevation is below 25 foot and raised to 25 foot, would you get the same benefit as if it was 25 foot to begin with? Benefit with respect to recharge, storage, and replenishment of the aquifer system. So that was the question specifically put to us, and the language, the draft language was proposed that for that. So we looked at that, and we evaluated what we considered to be the parameters centered around that, whether or not that would be the case. And long story short, with certain provisos, if you will, the answer is yes. If you raise the elevation to 25 and you use suitable well-drained soil during that process, and the ponds are located sufficiently in the center or away from the edges, if you will, of any properties that are sloped off, so that there's opportunity for any recharge to mound and gradually go down into the aquifer system as what occurs naturally, then the answer is yes. And so there's really no reason for us not to be able to engineer a scenario that would enable us to have the same amount of recharge as we would have under natural conditions. Now, having said that, of course, it is incumbent upon the developer to do the appropriate testing and incumbent upon the city staff to ensure that that testing bears that out in terms of, you want to have a soil boring with the proper permeability test, you have to have the proper soil characterization and so on, all the way down into to the water table to ensure that the proper soil is there to facilitate the recharge. So the report concluded that the proposed ordinance change is okay, in our opinion, with the condition that it is suitable soil that you're placing there when you build it back up to 25 foot. And, some of the things that went into the consideration is, of course, that any development that occurs above the 25-foot elevation, all of the runoff, if you will, should be stored, should be directed to dry ponds above 25 foot. So you don't want, the one thing we do not want to occur is for stormwater to be taken out of that higher elevation and sent to ponds that are at lower elevations. So we want to maximize the amount of storage that we have, or use the maximum amount of storage that we have by having higher elevated soil. So that's a key part of the ordinance. And so long as those conditions are maintained, we didn't see any reason why that wouldn't be beneficial. I think with that, I'll turn it back over to the board.
Okay. Well, I'm sure part of the reason why you're here is the board had questions.
Right.
And had questions directly from you. So what I wanted to do before we open to the public is give the opportunity to the commission to ask city staff and yourself questions. Member Noel Copeland.
Hi.
Hello.
You said that the ordinance was okay if it included the language around suitable, well-drained soil and some language around testing of that soil, bore testing, something like that, correct?
Correct. I do believe that that the language centered around, the types of testing that are, it's very typical. The type of testing that I'm proposing is a normal part of the process.
I just don't see it in the code.
Okay.
In the ordinance. I don't see the words
And it's not
suitable,
in the
well-drained
office letter of
soil
reference anywhere else?
in the ordinance, and I don't see the word test in the ordinance.
Okay.
So if you think it's okay, if it includes those things,
Right.
then I think the way that it's written, would you say it's not okay? If it doesn't call those things
Well,
out?
I think that there should be other, by reference, that language, that activity should occur by reference somewhere in the land. If it doesn't, then it
I don't
needs to
like
be in the ordinance.
assumptions, so
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
heard what you said, that
Yes.
you felt it was okay, provided that these things were covered, and I don't see them covered. Maybe
Right.
they're
Right.
reworded some other way, but I don't see the words that you said in the ordinance.
Okay, that's fair.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm KB, Community Development Engineer. The geotechnical reports that are part of our typical stormwater reviews are required to submit this information. As Mr. Bond said, this is a typical information that is part of a stormwater analysis for review by the city of Titusville, as is done in many other, all other jurisdictions in the state of Florida.
Go ahead. I'll get back to you. Dwight?
So if that's true, then why not put it in the ordinance? I mean, I realize you get a report, but that nothing in the ordinance says that it has to be a type A soil. You get a report saying it's a class D soil. The engineer supplied the information but there's nothing in the ordinance says it has to be a Class A soil, and that's what Mr. Barnes is saying, it needs to be in there. This is not that complicated.
Our ordinance,
Let me just say this, because Mr. Parrish and others of city staff have repeatedly told me and told the commission, unless it's in the ordinance, they can't enforce it. So just because it's good engineering practice, which I'm sure it is good engineering practice, you may have another engineer disagree with you. And then what do you do? So I don't know why you would resist putting something that's obvious in the ordinance.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit about soil types. So the Soil Conservation Service, has these different soil types, A, B, C, D. And the type A is the best, well-drained, most highly drained soil that's that they have, and a large portion of the city of Titusville above elevation 25 contains this type of soil. But that classification is not just the grain size and its permeability. It's also partially the depth to water. So the depth to the water table figures into the classification of that soil type and all the soil types. So Class B soil, and I have the numbers here somewhere, but so a lot of the soil types that are on the property, I don't know if you just referring back to some of the Brooksville, the Brookshire property, for example, has map ID 2, 28, and 38, which are the Ancoletti, I'm gonna, these Indian name sites, Mayaca, I know the Mayaca sand, and Imoki sand. And those three sand types are A/D for the first, B/D, and B/D. And what that means is that it is a Class B soil during the dry season, and it's a D during the wet season. So it's not just the grain size that communicates the soil type. Where the soil type is in the physiography of the land, it factors into it as well, because it's trying to also communicate storage and land slope. So when the land is sloped more, you're going to have less storage, right? Because it's going to go down. It could go down quickly, but if the water table is there, it's going to run off. So that, although it has a well-drained soil, it might be a B. It won't necessarily be an A because the water table's within 24 inches or 3 feet and so on. So it's a combination of different factors that enables it to have that Class A. So the best thing to make sure that we include in the ordinance would be language that doesn't say a type of soil per se, but says that it's well-drained, suitable soils or something like that.
Right, but that language is not in the ordinance.
Yes, well, if you're going to put that language in, that would be the language to put in versus a type, a specific type, because there's different things that go into the type of soil other than its grain size distribution and permeability.
So what would you suggest as language, and rather than just permeable soil? I mean, is that, because we have to walk away with some language suggestions, and this is one of the hangups.
Right, okay. I mean, I would say, it could be well-drained, suitable permeable soil, so suitably permeable soils. something like that, well-drained, suitably permeable soils, or something to that effect. I mean, there's several ways of saying the same thing, but you want to make sure it's clean from fines, clean from organics, basically, good, well-sorted, medium grain size soil.
So
That's too much information, but
you answered it, and I appreciate it. It's good input. So one of the things that I wanted to, I'm looking at it, I read your report, and so is it possible to, because one of the things that was brought up during the last kind of pseudo meeting was that you have increased storage as you go up. But, is it possible that in these areas of critical concern, barring, not talking about Brookshire or Brookville or, that we could actually, with these type of changes, because it's post-development, can we improve our conditions for the area well fields?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a good question. So, yeah, I think you can. I think in some instances, you can actually promote additional storage and better recharge than is presently there. It could go either way. So it's something that would be borne out by the initial soils data that you get for a proposed development. It might very well be that the soil that you're removing, if you will, or that you're moving out of an area that's more critical for recharge is a poorer quality, and that you put in better quality soil. So it can go either way. So it's just something that needs to be looked at and considered.
Okay. Are there any other questions, Mr. Barnes? Vice Chairman.
It's Mr. Barnes. I'm sure you've been furnished a series of questions that I provided.
Yes.
I don't know whether we have one new commissioner, Mr. Bobick. Has staff furnished you with a copy of the questions?
No, I haven't got the questions yet. Thank you.
I know you weren't here. Has staff given you a copy of the questions? Okay. Well, they were passed out at the last meeting, so I made a couple of extra copies because I didn't know whether or not you would be provided those. Certainly, I understood what Mr. Broom indicated, and I believe Brookshire does illustrate, represent the issue that is, and because you analyzed Brookshire in the context of this proposed ordinance. Certainly, my question number 18, I agree with you, probably is more appropriate for staff and not for you, and there's probably some questions in here that you didn't look at as such.
Right.
And the 1985 freshwater management study, I have a copy of it and am familiar with it and some of the original recommendations as such. And as I understand, you joined Dyer-Riddle in 1988, and we adopted this ordinance in 1986 is when we adopted the area of critical concern. I'm going to try to go through these very fast unless someone has some objection. The first one dealt with, I did provide a copy of the first 3 pages that included certain legislative findings of the original ordinance, and I just basically asked you, do you believe those still are true today? And either you've looked at them or you haven't looked at them. I don't know.
I think I'll take this one, Dwight, and certainly we can get the Mr. Barnes' opinion as well. In my opinion, yes, the findings still remain the same with one exception. When this was written in 1986, I believe the city of Titusville was supplied only by the Area 2 and 3 well fields. Today, as you're aware, we have the Area 4 well field. And so approximately 2/3 of the raw water supply now for the city of Titusville is supplied by Area 4, which is in Upper Floridan. So I just wanted to.
I'm certainly aware of that. That's
include
why
that
I worded
clarification.
this, remaining true today in protecting Area 2 wellfield, because I realized exactly what you said. In addition, the ordinance provided, I guess you could say, 5 factors that are very important as far as making sure we had the adequate quality and quantity of available water, which was local rainfall, soil permeability, water table level, topographic variables, and vegetation. Do you believe those still are important? I think you
Yes.
even listed more, as a matter of fact.
Yes, I do believe all of those are important. But you brought up a really good point. And when, so Area 2 was really going downhill, say a decade ago. And a big part of one of the things we were trying to do to help the city with the resource management as a whole was figure out a way to arrest the well fields. That was always the issue, that we couldn't arrest them. So we were over pumping them, which were, salting them up and encrusting them, and other issues compounding that. And being able to arrest those well fields is a big part of why we push so hard for the Area 4 well field. So right now, Area 2 is on the rebound, very much so. The water levels are steadily rising. The average annual water levels in Area 2 are rising. And the city will now be able to put it back into production at a much higher level than it has been, before the depletion. But to answer your question specifically, yes, those things that were important then are certainly important now. But the landscape has changed, because we do have the ability, one more tool in the overall resource management, the ability to arrest more wells, both in Area 3 and Area 2, so we can prolong their life. So we'll continue to be able to have the superficial aquifer lenses for a longer period of time.
I'm going to skip down to number 7. During your study of the Brookshire subdivision, did you perform any soil borings to confirm the soil type, soil location, or the local hydrological restrictive soil layers as such?
No, we didn't. We did not look at any.
And number 8, I refer to your page 7 of your report, where you show certain maps that were identified, soil survey maps, as 2, 28, and 38, which you identified were very poorly drained soils, which appear to me, based upon the layout of the retention areas, are where the retention areas are in the very poorly drained soils, particularly the one in Phase 1 at the southeast corner of the tract.
Okay.
Correct?
Well, I have to clarify, are we evaluating Brookshire, or is this relevant to the proposed ordinance, Mr. Barnes?
Right.
I'm evaluating this based upon, this leads to the soil type and what restrictive barriers there are in the soil suitability. Am I going to be interrupted in asking questions?
The goal is to make sure that the questions are relevant to the proposed ordinance, not to a particular subdivision. So I suggest if there are concepts appropriate to that, Mr. Barnes can certainly let us know if those concepts are relevant to the evaluation of the proposed ordinance language.
Well, if I did ask Mr. Parrish for soil types on other soils in relationship to attachment number 13, and you will find many of those soils types the same as on this property where these particular ones are located. So I feel as though it's highly relevant as such.
So let me inject real quick. The only issue, I know that we need to stay on point, and the only issue that I do have with this is that originally when we got the ordinance, we had this report attached to it. So if, on the other hand, if he is questioning directly, I mean, this is the report attached.
Correct. There's a report attached. The ordinance is not about the report. I understand the reason the report is attached is because a portion of the scope of work under the report was evaluation of the proposed amended language regarding location of retention. Some of the report was about Brookshire, but that was for staff's purpose in looking at that. The portion of the report that's relevant to the agenda item is that portion of the report that deals with the amended language regarding location of retention, which will be applied generally throughout the city, not to
Exactly.
this.
It's just that this was applied as a justification. That particular development is the reasoning that this is coming in for the change.
It was,
And that is the interpretation of staff is my understanding of why they are wanting to make the changes.
my understanding is staff had evaluated the code and interpreted the code to provide the same recharge, which would they applied throughout. The question was, is that an appropriate interpretation? And that was turned over to Mr. Barnes with regard to the proposed amended language.
Right.
And the reason I say that, I'm just looking at conclusion number 2, which is separate from number 1, that says BFA concurs with the proposed amendment to the AOCC code, retention and discharge requirements. There was 2 scopes of work to do. I'll let Mr. Barnes speak to that. I was just looking at the report.
I'm just making the point that if he is questioning, he's also questioning what was presented to us. So I don't know. You're the city attorney and you're
Sure,
the
now- well, I'm
previous
gonna-
city attorney, so
Sure, I'm going to let
So
Mr.
I guess I can't ask questions then?
What I'm going to suggest is that if there's questions that are relevant to the evaluation, and Mr. Barnes can answer with regard to his recommendation on the code language, entirely relevant. But due process is Brookshire's not here. It is not their subdivision that's being evaluated. That's not on the agenda. So if we have concepts, I would suggest they be general concepts that he could find as relevant that might be taken from that report.
Well,
But it should be, I'm just steering clear of evaluating.
Mr.
the
Broom, if you were
subdivision.
going to take that position, why didn't you show me the courtesy of calling me and telling me, and I could have gone over and revised some of these questions in advance, if that's your position? Why
That's
didn't
my
you show me the
position.
courtesy?
I didn't know I'd be here till 2 hours ago to wait.
What?
didn't know he'd be here tonight.
That's not on the agenda.
I can answer.
Brookshire is not on the agenda.
I mean, I
Well,
can,
the justification in part for this ordinance is the report relating to Brookshire. So I'm reviewing in part the report as it relates to Brookshire. And obviously, soil permeability is an issue, whether it's on this tract of land or the one at the south east corner of I-95 and Garden Street that has similar soils and similar heights, et cetera.
I mean, I can propose just a general answer. I mean, I understand the question. And, generally, so in soils and in hydrogeology and in the assessment of soils and hydrogeology, everything is really site-specific. It really is. So, you would really need, although it looks that way on the map, as I kind of alluded to earlier, you would have to have a bore in at that location to see if it's a suitable location for a pond. And fill in on top of it, if it is a suitable location, it would be a suitable location. It would still recharge the aquifer system, provided it isn't sloped and it has enough storage and room for the mound to build up beneath the pond without breaking, land surface as it goes down. So those locations, if there is a pond in that soil type, we would still need to have a boring at that location to determine if it's a suitable location and do that evaluation at that time.
Well, I noticed, and I'm assuming it's correct, that some of these soil types, for example, the type A soil that you referred to, which is number 44 in your in your report, which you've indicated is generally above 25 feet mean sea level in various areas of the city. Is that correct?
That's correct, right.
That the permeability of that soil is capacity of the most limiting layer to transmit water, very high, 19.98 to 50.02 inches per hour.
That's correct,
So if a drop of water falls on that, more than likely it's going straight down,
correct.
correct? Whereas, and unfortunately, soil number 2, which is in that corner,
Sure.
I don't see that in your report. But I do see number 38, I believe it is. And I can't tell you what page it is of your report because those are not numbered. Page 50 of our agenda item. That's in the depression and wet soil, a very poorly drained soil. It indicates that its capacity of most limiting is 0.57 to 1.98 inches per hour. So isn't that one of the reasons why we want these retention ponds above 25 feet, above 25 feet? Because this soil type, 38, its transmittal water is around an inch or less per hour. Isn't that one of the reasons why we want the ponds above 25 feet in the type A 44 soil?
Yes.
But the proposed ordinance, which concerns me, is in areas that have this other type soils that are not as permeable, that are restricted, limiting layers of 0.57 to 1.98 inches per hour.
So the answer to that question would be having data right in the center of the proposed pond location to see if the soils in that location are in fact suitable for drainage.
Well,
That's
the draft ordinance doesn't do that.
But you have to have that. Any ponds, even at 30 or 40 or 50-foot elevation, you could hit a hard pad.
Okay.
You could propose a pond there, and it might not drain. You could have clean sand on top, and at 3 foot down, there's a hard pad. So you have to have site-specific information wherever you're proposing to put a pond. And, so that's the case. I don't have a way of knowing if any, no one really does until you go there, because the soil conservation mapping is very generic. It's general. I mean, they're looking at maps and they're looking at plant types and water table, location of the water level, water table and so on, and they're drawing their estimation for where they think the soil type changes. And, you have to field verify exactly where you are, and before you can make that determination. Also, fill in on top of an area like that, with the slower drained soils. As I indicated, it may be that because part of the designation of that soil is poorly drained is partially due to the depth to the water table. So by adding 8 feet of soil on top of that, you've now increased the depth to the water table. So now you're actually hydraulically loading an area of the aquifer system. And by that additional force of the hydraulic load, you might recharge just fine.
No, you use the word, it may recharge just fine. However, if it does not, that is because that is a restrictive layer, as these soil types indicate.
It could
that
be.
water, that even though you fill it to 2 or 3 additional feet of fill,
Right.
it stands there
Could-
in the
there could
pond, And guess what happens? As you point out in your report, you have evaporation.
Right, and that could be the case. So you'd have to see if there's a truly restrictive layer. So you'd have to find out exactly what's going on right at that location. If there is a hard pan or a clay layer that's truly restrictive, then that's not going to be a good location for a pond. If it's just a sandy soil and the class designation that's given by the Conservation Service is because of the depth to water table, which could be why it's considered a B or a D, as well as a hard pan, then the boring information would bear out whether or not you would allow a pond to go there. And most land developers know how to interpret that data. And of course, the city staff would have to hold their feet to the fire as to whether or not it's a good pond location. And that's any pond, anywhere, even in the area that we would, consider it to be highly probable that it would be good. There could be a similar layer there.
On page 10 of your report, and you went through certain bullet items that you felt as though should be really appears to me in the ordinance. You indicate dry retention ponds should be positioned and distributed at the Brookshire site subdivision to allow maximum recharge without significant loss to evapotranspiration.
Right.
Whether it's Brookshire or any others.
Right.
In phase one of that subdivision, just as an example, for phase one, there's 93 lots and one large retention pond. Now, you're saying they should be distributed, positioned and distributed ponds. My question for you, it should at least 50% of those ponds be in locations above 25 feet. So you have the soil type, like type A, where it goes down at the rate of 19.9 inches per hour or up to 50 inches per hour. I mean, the answer to that is obvious, yes, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you want to maximize recharge.
Yes.
You want to maximize recharge, and you also want to, as much as possible, mimic the natural system. So you know what's there. If recharge is occurring a certain way presently, you want to try to develop in a way that sort of honors what's occurring presently. You don't want to take water from here and pump it way over there. If it's recharging here, you want to try to have your recharge, your ponds, your dry retention ponds within, distributed well across the site. That was the intention of that comment. And, that mimics the system because recharge is occurring everywhere naturally. So you don't want to take it all from one area and put it on another. Preferably, you'd like to distribute it so that, it would be better for the aquifer system if that occurred, if there was, distributed ponds, generally speaking. Now, I did not look in detail at the Brookshire, even though it's attached. Even though it's attached, I really didn't. I mean,
You didn't analyze the subdivision, whether it could be laid out differently or anything like that?
No, that wasn't our task at all.
Okay, I understand.
All right.
I understand. With regard to, partly based upon my experience, and we do have some engineers here, generally speaking, in our area of critical concern area, heights of 25 feet and above, as Dyer, Riddle, Mills, and Precourt chose.
Right.
Above 25 feet, one set of standards. Below 25 feet, a different standard.
Correct.
Correct?
Yes.
Isn't it correct below 25 feet, you start running into wetlands?
Yes, generally.
Yes. Just like, for example, the Brookshire property.
Well, but you
And I'll just show you, and I realize you didn't analyze this one, but the Brookshire property, it shows right there in the center of that retention pond, elimination of a wetlands. So going below 25 feet, they had to eliminate a wetlands to have this retention pond. Even on the north retention ponds, they intrude into wetlands. And when you intrude into wetlands, you intrude into the buffer areas, the nice large trees around wetlands, et cetera. Now, did you analyze that or look at that?
No, that wasn't a part of what we were tasked to do.
Okay. That wasn't part of your assignment
No.
to review. Okay. I'm going to skip ahead. I drafted an ordinance, which I asked you to look at.
Right, I did see that. Right. I saw that. Yeah, there we are. Yeah, we went through those.
It's attachment number 16.
I had my own copy somewhere. I have notes. Okay, there we go. No, that's not. No, I can look at his. I had notes on mine, but I don't find it. Okay. Hold on.
You need another copy?
Oh, no, I have a copy, but mine, which had notes on it, I don't see, but that's okay. I think I could remember my notes.
Mr. Barnes, I'll just tell you, I thought perhaps if the council wants to make this change, we ought to have one set of standards above 25 feet, another set of standards below 25 feet, and this set of standards with criteria, as you suggest on page 10 of your report, that if they want to fill some area above 25 feet, they can, and these are the criteria. Number one, the retention areas backfilled above 25 feet mean sea level. That's what you've suggested, correct?
Yeah, that's the intent of that
Right.
language.
And number two, the soil that is backfilled is permeable soil of similar texture and hydraulic characteristics. I put in that parenthesis type A, maybe we should eliminate that, and tested and approved by a geotechnical engineer. Do you have a problem with that suggested language?
No, I don't. I don't have a problem with that. But that's not for me to say. I mean, I believe that
Well, the language you used earlier was suitable soils.
Right.
What you used earlier.
Suitable, well-drained.
Suitable, well-drained soil.
Correct.
You would prefer that instead? I've almost verbatim copied what you had on page 10.
Right.
Where I got that.
Well, I mean, I said there were several ways of saying the same thing. I mean,
Okay.
I don't remember.
And I think what I've heard you say, you would agree with number 3, that is you ought to test the soil below what you've backfilled in there. So to make sure that its texture and hydraulic characteristic will function as a recharge. I've heard you say that, correct?
Yes, I think that occurs part and parcel with the land presently, with most land development projects. But yes, that needs to be.
Needs to be done.
It needs to be done. However it is occurring, it needs to be done. And to the degree that it's already occurring, then that might, the staff can speak to that.
Number 4, dry retention ponds shall be properly positioned and distributed throughout the site to allow maximum recharge without significant loss to evapotranspiration or seepage from the ponds. I just copied what you had on page 11 of your report. Now, you didn't put in the 50%, I put that in. Is that a reasonable percentage that should be in those type A soils?
I didn't understand that part, actually, because the minimum of 50% of the dry retention pond shall be located in pre-development areas. Why aren't we referencing post-development areas?
I'm just saying, if you're going to allow it below 25 feet,
It should be 100% should be post. It's like everything should be
Well,
above.
as I understood you earlier, it should be distributed throughout the site. And you agreed it should be in
Yes.
the location where there was suitably good recharged soils.
Correct, correct.
And since we know already that type A soils above 25 feet are suitably recharged soils, generally speaking, we know that.
Right. To be
Correct?
tested, right, that's correct.
Okay.
But post-development, all developed land above 25 foot should be, ponds should be above 25 foot. They should all be there. So it's 100%. Post-development's 100%.
Okay.
I think that, which I think is the intent of the ordinance, which I think it's sort of built in. It's like, everything, it doesn't say 100%, but it's like, it says all storage should be retained above 25 foot. If you're developing above 25 foot, 25 to 50, everything should be retained above 25 to 50. That's everything. You shouldn't take anything from there and put it lower. What I was saying about the distribution is, ideally, they should have multiple ponds. I don't know how that works with what the developer is trying to accomplish and, and so on, the flow or aesthetics and what have you. But if you have a square, it would be better if you had recharge sort of all around it instead of all on one side or all on the other side, because that mimics what's there. So that's my only reason for saying that. It's like to try to mimic the natural system as much as possible helps.
Okay. Number 5, applicants utilizing this section shall furnish data and analysis demonstrating that the post-development recharge will be equal to or greater than pre-development recharge by a qualified expert. I believe you said that on page 10 in your report.
I think that's a laudable goal. I think that it's something that could be something that's done at the municipal level or at the water management district level. I don't know that that's necessarily something that it's something that would inform your ordinance. So it's like a study needs to be done to help us understand pre-post relationship in these projects so we can be more prescriptive. And it's something that the water management district might fund even. But that was a sort of a laudable goal that I thought that was a good thing.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you about 6 because you did not analyze that subject. Okay?
Right.
That dealt with wetlands.
Right. No, we did not.
And number 7, the land surface surrounding the retention pond shall be relatively flat, no adjacent steep slopes that allow seepage outbreaks. That's your language, sir.
Yes. So, if you're above 25 here and then it drops off steeply, you don't want to put a pond right there because you can envision that you'll load the pond and instead of the flow going downward, it goes out laterally and then, sort of sheet flows out of the side of the embankment, if you will. So you want the ponds to be centered, have some buffer to allow it to percolate downward.
Well, is there anything else you think should be added if there was going to be an addition to this code?
No. I think that, and you guys obviously add in can strengthen for sure. I'm not meaning to say otherwise, but I do want to say that I think the ordinance is amazing. I think that the area of critical concern ordinance that the city has is very good. I mean, I think it's done an outstanding job in helping the aquifer, which I described is very tenuous typically, be maintained. I mean, I think that it's a part of that freshwater management study and implementation of the recommendations from the freshwater management study has played a key role, I think, in maintaining the wells and maintaining the well fields. And I think the ordinance is a key part of that. And I think that had we not had that, we might have seen more degradation. But a key part of the management also is now the ability to rotate and have some flexibility, a key part of the resource management.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yep.
Member Noel Copeland.
It was covered. My item was covered. Thank you.
All right, so I think we got the questions covered, but if you wouldn't mind staying a little bit longer, just in case. We'll open this to the public. Do we have cards on this?
Stan Johnston.
Stan Johnson, 860 Poinsett Avenue, Titusville, Florida. I have sent you a email on this. I've sent it also to Mr. Barnes and to a number of people, including Mr. Stauffer. I somehow would like to be recognized as an expert in some way because if I was still designing, I've designed
I want
over.
to pause you real quick.
Pardon?
So I want to give you a heads up. If we talk about qualifying you for an expert, you're going to use up all your time, and then you're going to be out of time. So
Well,
Wait a
let me just
second.
clarify.
this is what we went through
Well,
before.
I understand, but let me clarify. First, I want to point out, this is a legislative matter. It's not quasi-judicial. We're making a code change. As you know, staff is available, and they brought Mr. Barnes at the direction of this commission, who's recognized Mr. Barnes as a city hydrologist. Council has asked him to come render an expert opinion. So for this legislative action, they've decided to have expert opinion from Mr. Barnes, and you heard his resume. So again, this is not quasi-judicial. This is legislative. If you are now asking this commission to accept you as an expert and that you want to provide an expert opinion on this particular subject matter,
I do.
first, you'd have to identify particular testimony you had that you believe is relevant and
I've sent that in an email.
that qualifies. You have to then explain to this board your training, skill, education, experience, special knowledge you have on that subject matter that qualifies you as an expert specific to the agenda item we're discussing.
Actually, I've sent that before. Okay.
And
Okay.
then this board has to decide whether it's necessary and they need your testimony to assist them in this matter after having had expert testimony from Mr. Barnes.
Yes.
And then I'd also like to clarify, if he's attempting to be qualified as an expert, my suggestion is that is not his public comment time. If this board decides we've had expert testimony, you do not either qualify him or need his testimony, I would suggest giving him 3 minutes to provide public comment.
I didn't get that last part, but I guess I wanted to be recognized as an expert and to tell you what I've already done. In other words, I have sent emails to you and to others about expert witness testimony and about qualifications and so forth. And I've also sent you an email with questions to Mr. Barnes, which he has not answered and responded to, and I'm opposed to this. So I think that you would be very interested in what I have to say, especially considering that rather than a geologist, I'm a registered professional engineer who would be affected by this ordinance. He's not. In other words, I have designed over a dozen subdivisions in this area, many site plans and so forth. And so I would be affected by this, and I'm here to tell you that this ordinance is unacceptable in a number of ways, and it's nonsense. So I think you should be interested that I speak to you in an expert witness status. So can I be accepted from that? Or, I mean, and also, by the way, I was a professional engineer with the city of Titusville. My job description included a professional engineer. So I've done all these subdivisions and so forth. Engineer of record. He doesn't have that qualification. So I guess
I'm not hearing anything from the board that they want to qualify you or that they need your testimony in this regard. So failing that, you have 3 minutes to speak as far as public comment goes.
Wait a second. You said that, in other words, they're not, I would like you to show an interest that you have in what I have to say.
Mr. Johnston, you had commented that you're going to be affected by this ordinance, correct?
No, sir. No, I say in a general way is that people who are in my, I'm semi-retired. I won't be doing so much, let's say,
But just a moment ago, when you were addressing us, you said that you would be affected by the ordinance.
I would be more affected as a professional engineer. In other words, people in my, let's say, my peers who would be designers, they would be affected.
Okay, then in my opinion, if you're going to be affected by an ordinance, then you shouldn't be an expert witness or expert to speak about it if you're going to be directly affected by it.
Well, I would think so. I would think you would want somebody who's affected by it speaking about it. Oh, in other words, you feel like it slants my objectivity?
Yeah, I believe so, yes. If you're going to be affected by an ordinance, then you shouldn't be an expert to speak upon it because your side is obviously going to be favored.
Of course, that's what the expert witnesses come in and they show. In other words, when we have expert testimony, they are showing, they're giving expert witnesses one way or the other. And I'm supposed to be providing testimony that is objective.
So this is what I wanted to, and this is why I was saying this. Rather than, now we've spent probably 5 minutes talking about this, and this is why I wanted to try to avoid, because as we discussed before, we have to ask it, and I was trying to sidestep that in the beginning. So talk for 3 minutes, tell us what you're thinking, and
I'll try. I'll try. Okay. First of all, Brookshire does not represent the issue of, is not a good representative for this particular ordinance. It is not a good representative because what you can have is you can have a connection road that is below 25 feet, and you're required by code to treat impervious surfaces that are on the site that are below 25 feet. The ordinance says you cannot have, it requires that you have to have your retention ponds above 25 feet. The only way to do that you would have to provide a pump for your stormwater. I'm serious. Are you listening to me? Is that you would have to provide a pump for your storm. And that's because water flows downhill. I hope you understand that. But I'm serious. This is an issue of water flows downhill. What I'm trying to tell you is this ordinance is nonsense on this particular aspect. I'll read it to you. I'll read to you the ordinance and see how you catch it. It says, all required retention ponds shall be located in the areas above 25 feet, mean sea level post-development. You can do that. You can do that in Brookshire, but there'll be conditions that you cannot do that because water flows downhill. Now understand is what you do. It's when you fill, in this particular case, and I sent you an email on this. I don't know if apparently it sounds like nobody read it, but I gave you the example that is that in Brookshire subdivision, if you fill, if you're filling, you're being filling in places where maybe as much as 7 feet of fill. Now that's what's going to do. It's what's going to do the trees where that fill is applied. It's going to kill trees about everywhere where you fill about a foot of dirt over the existing land. Now when you cut, you're going to destroy the trees too. So this particular ordinance has the effect of, if I'm designing a subdivision, it's going to strip a lot of trees. It's unnecessarily because it will. So I'm mentioning to you, first of all, that it's nonsense. That because water flows downhill. So here's what I would like to do, is I'd like you to get somebody, a professional engineer, to sign a piece of paper that says that this ordinance will work and make sense. And I'll give you $20 to any professional engineer. You see, he's not a professional engineer. Fact is, I looked on his website, and all the professional engineers he had, they have no description of doing any site plans or subdivision who would be applying to this. I don't think he's done one subdivision. As far as I know, he's never done one. So I'll give you $20 if you can get a professional engineer, someone who would design a subdivision, who would say that this ordinance will work and make sense. So now can you recognize me as an expert?
I see no requests.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
So I wanted to,
Okay.
you sent out several emails on offering $1,000, $20. You do realize that all of us, I mean, I've done this for years and years and years. This is an unpaid position. I don't think that we're here for the money. I don't think that that's a, I understand you're making a point. I read everything you send to me. I listen to what you say. So please don't think that I'm dismissing what you're saying.
Okay, but you are. Go ahead.
So I appreciate you getting up here. I appreciate you coming up talking about it.
Okay.
And thank you for your
I
time.
wish you luck. Thank you.
Next card, please.
No more cards.
Is there anyone else that wants to speak?
Yeah, did anybody else out in the public want to, we just want to give you the opportunity. Okay, so we will close this item before, and bring it back before the board. Close it to the public and bring it back before the board. Thank you so much for coming. Believe me, this was a big deal to have you here, so I do appreciate you coming, and I also appreciate the city staff coming here as well. So for me, originally, as I said in the last meeting, I didn't have any issues with this, and but I wanted to take pause because, you know, Dwight has been with the city for so long. I trust his judgment. This was an issue. You know, I've looked at it. I do believe some of the points that have been made in the past and brought up again tonight. We've heard multiple times in other issues where if it isn't in the code, then city staff doesn't have a leg to stand on and they can't enforce anything. I understand that you could have tech manuals directing that. Our problem is that we want those guarantees because we've seen recently where we made that assumption that something would be true and it wasn't because it was in the code. This is just a follow-up because we believe the code is where that is what gives the city more leverage, even though we understand that the engineers are really doing the work behind the scenes. I understand that. So I think that there's been many things discussed tonight on suggestions. I know that for me, I think it can be enhanced. So I would entertain a motion or more discussion on a vote. Mr. We'll say Vice Chairman Severs.
I appreciate the fact that Mr. Barnes was here, and I think my concern simply is the city's well supply and protections of the city well supply. Since, like you, Mr. Barnes, I have lived with that a long time, more than 40 years for myself, and was involved in drafting the 1986 Area of Critical Concern Ordinance and working with Dyer-Riddle, Mills, and Freecourt. I'm thankful to hear what you've said about our regulations. Unfortunately, in my mind, a lot of them have been eroded over time, and they continue to be eroded. For example, since 2013, one of the provisions in the 1985 study provided there would be no clearing in the area of critical concern other than in the rights-of-way and utility easements and retention areas. No lots would be cleared. So you retain the vegetation, retain the lay of the land, so to speak. And there was the clarification in 2005 that if you can cut to 8 feet, you're supposed to really try to design otherwise. That applies to any subdivision that comes along. What I would propose to the commission is 2 motions. One motion I would propose, and I've taken the time and effort to write it out because I I don't want there to be any question about where we stand and the positions we're taking. The first motion would be to recommend denial of ordinance 27, 2019 for the following reasons. One, the ordinance fails to include any of the criteria suggested by Barnes Ferlin on page 10 of their report for filling the lands below 25 feet mean sea level to above 25 mean sea level post development, including the following criteria: testing the texture and hydraulic characteristics, the backfill, et cetera. And you can see those that I've included in there. I think properly positioned distribution to allow maximum recharge is very important because of evaporation and the like, as Mr. Barnes' report clearly points out. The second reason, and I believe this ordinance as prepared will have unintended consequences. One of the consequences will be there will be a tendency of applicants to want to take the soil from the high ground and put it in the low ground below 25 feet because they have an incentive to do so, and our recharge will lessen because of that. There is no limitation whatsoever in this draft ordinance that would prevent that, and it's written as an incentive to clear the upland and push that soil below 25 feet, even into wetland areas and other areas, as reflected on Brookshire in a number of locations. And that will be one of the unintended consequences. The third one I listed was, in addition to lowering the hills, as drafted, the ordinance will encourage impacting wetlands and buffers around the wetlands, contrary to the conservation element of the comprehensive plan, and destruction of the tree canopy. I gave you a picture of a tree that I think will suffer the consequences if this ordinance is adopted and the land around that tree is filled, as certainly Brookshire on its face is not above 25 feet. It just isn't. It's not filled to above 25 feet. So for those reasons, I would respectfully move that we recommend denial, and I'll follow up with another motion recommending a different ordinance. So that's my motion, sir.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We can take a vote on this. Any discussion on this? Okay, we take the.
Member Bobbitt?
I back the motion.
Member Spidel?
Yes.
Member Richardson?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Severs?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes.
The second motion would be, so council can have a copy of the exact motions so they can see them. I believe council will want to amend the code. Therefore, being a realist, I think we have a duty and obligation to present to them what I think Mr. Barnes is recommending in his page 10 of his report. And Mr. Barnes and I don't disagree at all. And I respect him for what he's done. And I would move that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend to the City Council that ordinance 27 be amended as follows. Number one, correcting the scrivener's error in section 30-207A2C as reflected, and that section 30-207A2D be added. And you can see the language, and those are the words basically that I have gone over. I think, as I said originally, I think we need to clearly have an ordinance above 25 feet, and these are the standards We have one at 25 feet, and if you want to, the third criteria would be if you're below 25 feet and you want to fill up to 25 feet, then we have standards set out, clearly objective criteria as such. And I think this ordinance would accomplish that.
Second.
Did you have anything you wanted to, okay, so we have a motion and a second, but was that a second for discussion? Because you were up, so.
Just a regular second. I don't have anything to add.
All right. All right, we'll take a, well, hold on.
Chairman, could I ask, Mr. Severs,
Yes.
in your motion, the motion number 2 that was just handed out, it references a type A soil. I know in your discussion, there was discussion of well-drained, suitably permeable soils. I just want to clarify.
I have no problem with
I
that,
just-
that change.
I'm not suggesting, I just wanted to see if that, because that was brought up by a couple of you. So
That was my question, too.
Okay, I would amend my motion to include that.
So Member Noel Copeland, we're good? I can,
Second
Yes, that
change.
was-
Second stands.
okay. Can we take a vote on this?
Member Richardson,
Yes.
Member Spidel,
Yes.
Member Bobbitt,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Severs,
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland,
Yes.
Chairman Williams.
Yes. Kind of like reminds me of one of those magician shows where, you know, somebody pulls out something that we've been talking about. I know you're a lawyer, so I mean, it's not like, but everything that we talked, so you came well prepared. Okay, so this goes to council next Tuesday? Correct. Okay. All right. Was there anything you would like to report?
No, sir, I do not have a report.
All right, so we'll go to petitions and requests for public present. And in the meantime, Member Noel Copeland?
On the actions from the city council, on the actions of the city council, I just had a question on what are our next steps for the new plant nursery ordinance?
Oh, I thought,
They
yeah,
continued the existing temporary ordinance, but
They did, but
we
they
had talked last
suggested,
time about putting something permanent in place. So what are our next steps on that?
they directed them to look into making it permanent.
We'll have to draft an ordinance and come back to you and to the city council. At this point, we'll probably come up with some criteria to show to you, to see what you think, for the city council to see what they think, if that's what they intended based on their advisability. And then we'll go forward with drafting an ordinance.
What are your
Right.
thoughts on timing?
Right now, the extension was approved.
Agreed,
Yeah.
but what do you think the timing is on looking at something more permanent?
It's going to take a few months because we do have advisabilities to draft other ordinances as well. I think we totaled it today about 7 altogether.
I just don't want to kick the can so far down the road that we're back at re-upping another year and we
Understand.
haven't taken action. So I understand there's other stuff, but I don't want it to get lost in the shuffle.
Understand.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll go back to petitions and requests from public present. Anybody like to?
Stan Johnston. Although I said I was a professional or expert, I guess I'm not considered that much by this body. But here's what I put together. This is something which I find I didn't like to do. It's critical of our city government, especially at top levels, city manager, mayor, and council members. And in this particular case, I've written on this. It says, I seek the truth and rigorous honesty. Should any reader find errors with any part of this writing, this flyer, I request that they notify me with an explanation of my errors. My email address and so forth is on this. This is targeted to defend myself too, because there's claims that the city has spent $70,000 investigating me and my correspondence, that they have had an independent engineering organization to review my correspondence from 2012 to 2019. And they have a report on that disproves just about everything that I've been doing, saying, and so forth. Unfortunately, the city has not been able to find that report. has not been able to give me the name of the engineering company or the name of the engineers, and they haven't been able to find the contract. This has been going on for over 7 months now. So I'm going to call this is a hoax, this is a fraud, this is something like Tooth Fairy and so forth that the city has been promoting. And so I've identified a number of other problems that the city has been doing, and that is, for example, the denial of the fact that water flows downhill. For example, that has to do with the drainage that I explained to you before in the 5 o'clock meeting, is that the city has clogged drainage canals that are on west of I-95 that needs to be cleaned. So I'm bringing this to your attention. So if you have any questions about it, this is a serious matter. It's a matter of not just deception, dishonesty. It's a matter of fraud also. So I would like you to take a look at this seriously. This is certainly something that affects everybody in the city and what's going on. I've asked for the resignation of our mayor on this accord. I've asked for the termination of our city manager. So if you have some questions, I would think that you might have some questions about this. This is a serious thing that I'm asking you to look into it. It's unfavorable. It's an unpleasant task that I've undertaken. So does anyone have any questions or comments to me? You can give them to me later. As far as I know, this is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who'd like to give me the opportunity? All right. So we'll go down the list here. Member Richardson, anything you'd like to report?
No, sir.
Member Noel Copeland.
No report.
Member Spadell.
No, sir.
Vice Chairman Severs.
No report.
Member Bobbitt.
Nothing to report.
And City Attorney, just you normally. All right, and so we're adjourned. Thank you.